So now we want to get into some of the settings, kind of seen within Register 360, as well as kind of some of the best practices with that. And so right now, I'm assuming you have Register 360 installed. You got classification, data setter, and the installer done as well. So at this point, you're really just trying to copy paste some of these settings or go through and understand what they all mean for the end user. So I primarily work in, I almost exclusively work in feet, being in the US, but I'm also, international foot is our typical day to day, just for use cases with recap files, RCS, RCP exports going into Autodesk software, keeping the foot type as international instead of US survey. Also make sure there's no weird scaling issues between the different file unit types. Temperature, we're not using BLK data or BLK G1, Gen 1, so therefore this is kind of irrelevant. Measurement, I like to use advanced because I always like to see my XYZ coordinates for each pick point along with the deltas and horizontal and straight line, so advanced is my preferred. Animations, I always say turn this off, just see a faster navigation through the software, snapping around, flying through different views, view cube, preset views or whatnot. Turning that off will just make everything a lot snappier. Some of these other settings, again, they kind of apply to BLK data, which I may or may not get into. One thing though is this add target at setup position. You can do this after it's been imported, but new features added in, new workflows. So if you're using P-Series data or you have your RTC data set up with a tribe rack over a known point with a known height, you can go and set basically a target or a control point, virtual target at the center point of each scanner setup, and allows you to do some different workflows with tiny to control whether you have 2 points or 3 points or multiple points. Target thumbnails and hue intensity, just a preference. I just leave it off to do black and white. Import performance, so with my computer and most of our computers, we do have generally pretty well spec'd systems. And so with the different import performance, the key factor is going to be your system memory available. That's going to really, I believe that's going to be the primary factor with, I guess, in addition to how many CPU cores you have available. But between those two, if you're on fast, doing full 5K images, you'll do 4 setups at once with 128 gigs of RAM. If you do 4K images, you can do up to 6 setups at once. If you don't import with images turned on, with these settings, you'll always do 6 setups simultaneously within the fast import performance. And then as you go from fast to balanced, you're going to go cut that number in half from 6 to 3 or 4 to 2. And then ultimately, if you're in safe mode, it's really only ever going to be one setup processed at a time. And so if you ever have systems with limited resources available or you want to multitask and not let your computer get bogged down, safe mode is an option. Between balanced and fast, your computer's still going to be chugging along pretty hard, especially if you have some decent specs to throw at it. So that's going to be your import performance. I always just say leave it on fast, start with that. If you have any weird issues, crashes or whatnot, then you can consider changing it down to balanced or changing panel image and whatnot. So with importing images, especially from an RTC data set, that is going to be the most time-consuming part of any import, regardless of scan density used. So with the RTC, it's doing 5-bracketed HDR, so there's 180 photos that it's stitching together. And the raw images are something like 450 megapixels wide by like 250 or so to create the full 360 panorama. And then once it fully processes, the 5K images are at the 5K resolution. I think it's about 210 megapixels is the final 360 image. So very, very high resolution. But that being said, the resolution and clarity difference between 4K and 5K is pretty minor in a lot of scenarios. So only if you're like trying to go and identify a snapped grid line intersection on the concrete or some kind of feature like 25, 30 feet away, and you need the utmost resolution, detail, clarity, especially when you're looking through the HDR imagery, then you might want to consider doing 5K. But for us, for the most part, we like to just put it on 4K. So for like import performance differences, for example, we find for a lot of scenarios, just call it outdoors, open sky environment, not inside. With my laptop, it takes maybe, call it 2 minutes per setup to do scan plus the pano imagery at 5K. If I bump that down to 4K, it almost cuts the resolution or the import time in half. Let's maybe call a minute 10 to a minute 15. And then again from 2K, it's going to cut that in half again almost. And then 2 to 1K, it's still much faster, kind of almost cutting that duration in half yet again. As for like when to use the different settings, again, 4K and 5K are very, very similar. For us, most scenarios we're just staying in 4K. Only for like final documentation, archival, we know that like we're okay with spending the extra time. Then we'll bump it to 5K. Scenarios where we do 2K is if we have images captured, but we're not using the images whatsoever, we just simply want a colorized RGB point cloud, then we'll do 2K. And then 1K, it's such low image resolution. For us, it's just, there's no need. The colorization still works. It may not be as precise of colorization of the point cloud. So unless you really aren't picky about your colorized point cloud, you might want to consider 1K. But all of these settings, you have to keep in mind when you import these, you have to set this before you import. Because if you import at 1K, there is no re-importing that same project, those same setups at a different resolution, unless you do some funkiness with like creating a new job, re-importing from scratch, exporting those images, and then importing those images into the other job that was previously imported with lower resolution. So just keep in mind, you have to set this before you import, and that's what you're stuck with for your image resolution until you, or unless you ultimately re-import again from scratch. External cameras doesn't really apply to RTCs. I think just on some older P-Series scanners and software improvement, you can join that if you want. It just when you have crashes, it can automatically set up some emails to go send log files. Links, so between 24 and 25, there's definitely some differences here. So max target error, it's going to apply in a couple scenarios. One, if you're using applied control, so you have known control points you're using to georeference a data set. This is kind of your criteria that you're telling the software, as long as the error of applied control to each of these points is less than this 3 inches, 0.25, it'll utilize those points. Even if they have 0.245 of error in them, it's less than that threshold. If you're doing target constraints, black and white target cards, spheres, manual virtual targets, and using those as the constraints instead of doing cloud to cloud, again, those constraints would have to fall under that error for the software to go and utilize them. Otherwise, it'll revert back to cloud to cloud alignment and kind of priority. So that's max target error. Whenever you're doing some troubleshooting, sometimes you can bump that up to 1-2 feet just to try to identify potentially which control points have an issue, a bust, something that's going wrong with them. So that's kind of a temporary thing you can keep in mind. Autospheres, again, this goes back towards the import of data sets. If you're using spheres and you want it to auto-find, auto-extract them, you have to make sure you have that set to the correct size spheres you're using. Otherwise, it may or may not find all the spheres captured within the project. So appearances and kind of a theme with 25 is going to be structured and unstructured data sets. So structured, basically any kind of terrestrial laser scanner that has set up positions still contained, whether it's from raw data, whether it's from E57s or PTX, I think, PTS or PTX, whichever one is structured. But that allows you to basically re-import as if it was raw data sets, or kind of act like it, because each setup is its own point cloud, its own file, own information, versus unstructured RCS point cloud, one single file for all setups, all the point cloud as a whole. LAS, LAZ, LGSX is technically an unstructured data set. There's some funkiness with LGSXs. And so all of these differences in the links, so these are just strictly visual properties to help you kind of identify if you're having issues or problems within the data set. So I generally just leave these at default. You can adjust these more or less as you see fit. If you want more strict to help you identify for really tight tolerances or not. But yeah, generally it's just going to be, if it meets both of the criteria for 0.03 of error and greater than 20% overlap, it's going to show up as green. Anything between the 0.03 and 0.05, and then the 15 and 20%, it'll show up as yellow. Anything that's beyond either the 0.0449 or 50%, it's going to automatically show up as red. And then same concept with the unstructured data sets. You're going to typically see higher values or error values with unstructured, just due to the nature of working with a larger point cloud, noisier data potentially tying into a single setup. So that's why you're going to see kind of larger values, some of the links and cloud-to-cloud settings with other steps and stages of the job. Link creation criteria. So this is a pretty important one to know and understand, just because for us in our use cases, we're temporarily changing these values at multiple points kind of throughout the process, the registration. So during import, especially if you're using the Field 360 app to do some of the pre-registration, pre-alignment kind of in the field, just to get generally setups located where they should, add a handful of crosslinks. Right, it's more or less coming in where it should, so you don't need it to like rerun everything during import. You want it to get imported as fast as possible so you can get right into that QC stage is kind of for us the best workflow. So we always like to turn off that setting for apply during import. But with those error values and the overlap percentages, again, these are something that we're going to pretty routinely temporarily change to either more strict or less strict. So whether we're running cloud to cloud on all our links and we wanted to run through 800, 1,000 links and keep it going quick and fast, I might give it less stringent, higher values or higher error values and lower overlap values, just to make sure that it's going to go crunch through all of those links in that cloud-to-cloud algorithm as fast as possible. Same goes to the max iterations, how many times it's going to run each link. But whereas if I want to go on auto add links and let the software like find possible links and verify that they're good, then I want to use more stringent. So maybe like 0.025, 5/16 of an inch of error with like 25, 20%, 30% overlap, whatever you see fit. Then you can go and change those to make sure that the software isn't just going to arbitrarily add a bunch of bad links. You want to be a little bit more stringent with that. So that's kind of this couple quick scenarios where I'm temporarily changing it back and forth depending on what I'm doing within the software. All again is just to make sure that the software is running as fast as possible. I'm not slowing it down unnecessarily, but without also adding error to the data set at the end of the day. So from there, a couple of these other settings, always bundle optimize upon link creation. I generally leave this on unless you're going to be manually creating a bunch of links, like just call it more than like 50 at a time that you're manually creating one by one. Then you might want to turn that off just so that you optimize at the end, just so that it's not taking 3 to 10 seconds after every link you create. Advanced optimization. So I believe the help manual will say it applies to data sets that have 500 links or more. But so as you do optimize the links in your bundle within your data set, and you're doing that kind of distribution of error to try to make everything close the loop as tight as possible. If you have less than 500 links, it doesn't matter if you have advanced optimization turned off or on. It's just going to be the exact same. But because once you get over 500 links, again, due to the kind of the time differences and time it can take to optimize either 501 links or 5,000 links can be pretty dramatic. So if you wanted to do just a local optimization, right, kind of this area, this room, and kind of the nearest 500 links, if you have that advanced turned off, it's only going to do for kind of that local area that you're working on or the last link you created, like within 500 links of that setup. Whereas if you turn advanced optimization on, no matter what, it's going to go through and do a total bundle optimization, full loop closures, full everything, just to make sure that the data set as a whole is staying as tight as possible. So for a lot of scenarios in us, we just leave it on advanced, and whether or not it's making a difference, just to make sure that we're always getting the best possible scenario of accurate registration. Allow link creation across sitemaps in the import area. Not a feature I use a whole lot, but you can leave it on if you want to go mess with that. Snap bundle and setups to apply control. Same thing. We usually just do all control kind of after the fact, after it's been imported, but just leaving it on doesn't really hurt anything. As for this last one, so use level from dual access compensator when using applied control. So this is a very important one to understand and use and when to use it, because when you're using applied control, and you have data sets with RTC 360 and high tilt accuracy setup information, that's going to keep your data set level based off of the scanner's sensors. So if you have that turned off, when you go to apply control, let's say one of your control points was vertically off 6 inches. It's going to do a full 3D transform of your point cloud to best fit those utilized control points. And so that control point that's 6 inches off in the Z or the elevation, it's going to go try to best fit your cloud to that, not knowing that it's inaccurate. So therefore, it's going to tilt your point cloud. So in some scenarios, right, if you don't trust the levelness of the data set, if there's something weird going on, or the high tilt accuracy just wasn't enough, and you want to use a known validated benchmark elevation across a series of points, then you want to turn that off because you want it to transform, full 3D transform your point cloud and make sure that it's matching the known and validated stuff as perfect as possible. Other times, if I don't know if the control is good, or I'm just kind of shooting blind in some scenarios, I might want to keep that on because generally speaking, the RTC data holds a level extremely well for us. And we've come to trust it and utilize it for floor flatness analysis applications and reporting. So again, there's different scenarios, but that's how you can control and whether or not you want your point cloud to get tilted or not, whether or not you're applying control or not. So good one to know and understand. Maximum suggested links added per bundle. So this is when you're going to go into the auto add links features and options. I think default is 50, but basically you can bump this up, I think, up to like 1,000 or maybe even 10,000 now and 25. But when you want to let the software auto find links that meet your structured and or unstructured link creation criteria, that's where it's going to go and show. It's going to, hey, I think I see about 100 links or up to 100 links, and you can go and let it auto add up to that many. But if you're working on much larger data sets, right, it could not be 100, but it could be a couple thousand that you could potentially create. So you might want to bump that up. It's just going to take much longer to go and run. Generally speaking, though, I like to do it in just small chunks, 50, 100, and just do it in batches, right? Let it go and try to add 100. Okay, it added 80 out of the 100. Okay, now redo that, show suggested links. It's going to show another 100, and then you let it run again, and it might add another 50 as you increase the kind of that radius of links being added. So yeah, good one to know there as well. Licenses, this is where you're just going to go make sure you're using the correct license server if you do a network and or CLM and locally hosting licenses to your computer. Cloud to cloud, so your max iterations. Again, this is another one you're going to temporarily change up or down with max point density depending on what you're doing. Whether you're auto adding links or you're running cloud to cloud on everything, it can make a pretty big difference to the time it takes to run some of these tools. So max iterations is simply you're telling the software, here's the hard cap as to how many times you can try and run and find the best fit between setups. More often than not, as long as they're within the ballpark of each other, or the search radius being like, okay, as long as I have walls and features that are within 9 inches of each other, it's going to pretty well find it within a handful of tries, and then it's not going to get any better, so it's not even going to use the full 200. But when you're auto adding links, for example, and your setups may or may not be in the perfect spot, already aligned to one another, it's going to go and try and find that best fit up to however many times you have set. So 200, I think 100 is default, but I like to do 200 for when I'm running cloud to cloud on all links, just to make sure that it's really finding the best link or the best alignment. And then if I'm auto adding links and I'm doing 100, 200 links at a time to try and find and add, then I might change the max iterations to something like 10 or 20 so that it's not going to sit there and search forever. I want to be very quick about finding good links and then moving on. Don't spend a minute per setup to try and find 50 different options that are never going to work. So yeah, max iterations, you'll kind of want to bump that up or down depending on what you're doing. Max point density, so this used to be in the 24 versions where you had to have this set before import, with just how Register 360 handles point cloud data from visual to cloud to cloud. Cloud to cloud points are strictly used for cloud to cloud registration and alignment. So this max point density is you telling it, okay, 100 being 100% of the density, 1 being 1%, how much of the point cloud do you want the software to go and utilize to do the alignments with cloud to cloud? Using less points, it's less data that it has to handle and manage, therefore it's going to run a lot faster, whether you're auto adding links, whether you're running cloud to cloud on our links, or just doing a simple visual alignment between two links or two setups. So max point density is another one, right? Maybe you already added all your links and now you want it to go run a cloud to cloud and be really tight or as good as possible. Then you might want to bump that max point density up to 20, 30, 50, or whatever you have time for. Because increasing the value can increase the time it takes pretty dramatically, but at the same time, it's using more points, so it should do a better job of making absolutely sure of the alignment between setups and your bundle. So again, another one you're going to temporarily change back and forth depending on what you're doing with your workflow. Normal deviation allowance, so this is just kind of like a noise filter. I think one is the max filter, 100 being it's going to use all the points regardless of how noisy they are. 50 I think is the default, so this one again can pretty dramatically change the time it's going to take to go and auto add links, to go run cloud to cloud on our links, or do a single link creation. For now I've just been leaving it on default at 50 and it's been working pretty fine. Haven't noticed any issues in terms of accuracy. But if there are some difficult scenarios or lots of vegetation or scenarios where cloud-to-cloud registration just isn't ideal, then you might want to consider bumping that down to a lower value. That's going to filter out more noisy points. So try to only use the good, clean surfaces, objects as the references to line setups together. Waypoint, cloud-to-cloud generation radius. So if you want to go and manually add a waypoint from other setups, kind of create virtual waypoints to go and be utilized for alignment between whether it's unstructured or structured data. When you go and do that, this is just basically saying, hey, okay, at this location that I picked, give me a 100-foot radius from there and use all of those available points as like that kind of virtual waypoint or that new setup created. It's going to use a 100-foot radius as that setup's points, which will then be utilized for future links, future alignment between data sets, between areas, bundles, setups, whatever. So yeah, and then with unstructured data, all the same concepts. It's just you're dealing with unstructured data. There is no individual setups. You're dealing with one whole point cloud. But that again, that's where the waypoint creation, waypoint cloud to cloud generation, that's where that's going to come into play. So some of these values are definitely going to be a little less stringent compared to the defaults of structured. And there's going to be larger search radiuses just due to the nature of unstructured data, may or may not be as clean as structured setups. With the option at the bottom, checkbox, show suggested links after visual alignment. Especially if you're new users, this is a good one just to keep on, just because you're going to see as you start to add links, add cross links, it's always going to be sitting there and kind of showing you and recommending like, hey, I see overlap between these setups, so that you can either manually add one at a time, or you can click one of them and then add all of them, all visible suggested links. So yeah, I like to leave that on, even for more advanced users. They're just always helpful. Prioritize targeting cloud to cloud. Just a different way to go about workflows. So if you're utilizing black and white targets or spheres as the constraints for alignments versus doing cloud to cloud, you can basically tell the software, hey, when targets are used as those constraints, follow those more so than the cloud to cloud. Depending on your environment, depending on your scenario, may or may not help. So that's definitely more of an advanced thing, but it's an option thing nonetheless. So filtering tab, these are just gonna, we generally keep them maxed out. Only in some scenarios with the mixed pixel filter points, we'll change to low or turn it off altogether. But remove intensity overloaded points, pretty easy to understand. If you have reflective objects, surfaces, think street signs or reflective surveying target cards, that they're designed to try to as perfectly reflect that laser beam as possible. And so especially with RTC data, it's not designed to handle that strong of a laser return. Therefore, it's not going to be accurate, and it's just going to automatically ignore them or not even import those points. If you're like in, I don't know, a mechanical room or a kitchen that has a ton of stainless steel or semi or mostly reflective surfaces and objects, you might want to turn this off just so you get better, more full coverage of the data captured. So just something to be considered. But again, these are all only available or only apply during the import of raw data or import of general data sets. Removing ambiguous points, call it just noise. Just in general, it's like the laser potentially hit multiple objects or reflected weird. It's just going to be noisy data. So definitely keeping that on never hurts anything. You're just going to get cleaner data sets. And then remove pixel fix, remove mixed pixel points. So this is, depending on the software, sometimes called edge artifacts or I forget other terms that I've seen for it, but right, the laser beam, it's not a perfect pinpoint. I think out of the RTC, it's 2 or 3 millimeters wide, and then as you grow out to like 100 meters far away, and I think it's like 30 centimeters or 30 millimeters. I don't know. It grows quite a bit the further away you get from the scanner. So that being said, your laser beam, as it's hitting the edges of objects, right, it's going to kind of hit something in front, the first object, and then the other half of that laser beam is going to continue past, and it's going to go and hit whatever's beyond that. And you're going to kind of see two returns, or the software is going to see two returns for that one pulse in a sense. So it's going to, I think, just kind of like average out those two, whether it's the distance shot or like the surface. You're going to see, right, the edge, or you can kind of know where the edge is at, but you're going to see points that are like halfway between that first reflection and that second reflection. And so that's mixed pixel filters. As for the slider from low to high, it's basically just going to be how much along that edge where it's kind of picking that up is it going to cut those points out. So high, with the slider at high, it's going to be about a 1/4 inch on either side. So right at the corner of a wall, from where that edge is truly at, plus or minus a 1/4 from that edge, it's just going to automatically ignore those points and not import them. Medium, it's about 1/8 of an inch. Low, about a 1/16 of an inch. So scenarios where I like to turn this to low or off altogether is when I'm scanning very small objects or small diameter objects that I need to get as much detail as possible. Big one, anchor bolts for structural steel. Sometimes you're dealing with 1/2 inch bolts. Sometimes you're dealing with much bigger ones. Either way, I want to capture as much of the anchor bolt as possible all along those edges. So when I go into 3DR and other downstream applications to do some auto extraction and go and pull those out for as-builts, I have as much data as possible, and I'm not missing a bunch due to this mixed pixel filtering. So good ones to know and understand for sure. Most scenarios, you're probably just going to leave them all on and all maxed out. P-series data, only if you're working P-series data, those apply the same exact concepts. Rendering, slider, gamma, I think it's just how it's going to go and show the different hue intensity type of point cloud colorization. Just leave it on default. Really don't see a need to mess with that. Setup radius, if you want to increase or decrease the setup size through visuals when flying, by all means you can do that. As for these other checkboxes, so in switching between bundle, setup cloud views, do not change the zoom extents. Definitely leave this one on so it doesn't kind of keep snapping you out into space or zooming way out on the point cloud. That being said, there's a known bug in 2025 in some scenarios and switching between certain views that this does not apply. But other than that, those few kind of random locations or scenarios, it's pretty good about keeping your zoom extents the same as you change views and move around. Another good one, especially when you're starting to deal with multiple sitemaps for organization of data, different levels, different objects or scenarios within your data set and your bundle, showing only the setups that are in that sitemap is a good one, just so you're not seeing, right, I might have 500 setups in a bundle, but in this one sitemap for level 1, I only have 100. I only want to see those 100. Therefore, you got to make sure that this is turned on. Otherwise, when you're viewing other sitemaps, even though it only contains the 100 setups that you drag and drop, it's still going to show you all the connected points from all setups. As for this show all setups linked by control in Cloud View, I think this is by default is turned off. Be honest, I don't know off the top of my head what this all really affects. It's definitely just it's workflows that we don't necessarily need or utilize. Export, so in 25, a couple different options here, slight adjustments to them. Create point cloud during finalized registration creation. So when you go to do the export stage, depending on your file format, I think structured E57 is for sure the one. There might be a PTS or PTX option, but it doesn't. It just basically pulls from the database the setup information and goes directly into an E57. So it doesn't have to create a finalized registration. When you do other point cloud types such as an LGSX, LES, RCS, it's going to have to do some conversions of those point clouds and the setup information within the database to create the file format that you need. And so if you don't have this turned on, or you, I guess what I'm trying to say is, right, there's ways to link in the finalized registration from Register 360 into 3DR. If you have this turned off and you do a structured E57, it's not going to create the registration. Therefore, you won't be allowed to link this data set into other Leica software applications. So I like to just keep it on so I have the full ability to go and process or speed up some of the downstream workflows. But either way, if you have a point cloud select that's like an LGSX, it's going to create the finalized registration regardless of what you have checked here, because it just simply needs to do that so that it has that information to go and export. But it's really just creating a point cloud within the project, within the database of files that it uses for exporting out different file formats. Export clean point cloud for E57, these other file types, definitely leave it on. If you ever do any manual cleaning, if you don't have this on, it's just going to ignore all the cleaning stuff you have deleted, turned off, or invisible, whatever. So definitely want to make sure what you cleaned gets exported through into those formats. Export the panoramic scan with image. So if you're doing exporting of the images, editing them in third-party applications, called like Lightroom or Photoshop, to then re-import. Leaving this off is just going to be the JPEG and or the EXR or HDR image file formats. If you turn this on, it's also going to do a 360 image, basically just taking the point cloud captured with the different intensity, and it's going to export that along with the image. Haven't really had a need for that in our workflows, so we just leave it off. Structured E57 and compatibility format. So there's some pretty good notes within the help manual, but ultimately if you're having issues with E57s being read correctly in other third-party applications, whether it be for scene or recap, you might have to try this compatibility format. Might take a little longer, might be a little bit larger file size in the end, but it's an option you can try if you're having issues viewing, rendering, loading up that data. But for the most part, us, when we use Cintu Cloud with E57s or sharing with other third-party vendors, we've never really had a need to do this compatibility format. Export normals, this is a new one. So E57, PTS, PTX. If you want to turn it on, it adds a little bit of time to the export, increases the file size a little bit, but it just embeds normals for your points and your point cloud within the file type that you have options for. So turn it off or on as needed. I've been turning it on for a few different projects, and it works pretty well. Delay report creation, it's just a convenience. We don't use the reports for a whole lot, especially on much larger data sets with thousands and thousands of links. Creating that report could take a while because those PDFs could be hundreds of pages long. So we just like to turn that on so that it's just once we go to hit publish for all our file formats, then it goes and spits out the report, and it doesn't slow us down getting to that final export stage. And then just a good safety check is just perform this integrity check upon publish. It'll add a few seconds to maybe a minute or two during the export, depending on your file's project size. But it's just a good check to leave on. If you have anything weird going on with your databases or your point cloud files, it'll also repair those and just make sure that there's no issues with the export. So we always leave that on just for safety. And the signatures, we are not dealing with that workflow, so we just have it turned off. That's, I think, more so for the forensic side of laser scanning data sets. But those are, in a nutshell, kind of the general settings, some information and reason behind them, and at least for our use cases in our industry, kind of what we use as a starting point. So in the next video, we'll kind of go over the project storage, talk through some of the best practices, settings, and all of that with that. So we'll see you in the next.